Light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. Today I wanted to offer a few thoughts on the exchanges that go on within society. We've all heard the expression since early childhood probably that it's more blessed to give than receive. It's such a worn out phrase, and I suppose it was supposed to encourage generosity in the majority of the population, and I'm not sure it's really been successful in doing that, but the problem, as I was thinking about that and about the relationship and deconstructing it, looking at the different pieces and parts, one of the discrepancies or one of the unbalanced points I discovered was that in some cases there is a profound difference between what is given and what is needed. Well, I guess just take a step back and be a little more upfront about my own situation. I continue to do these shows because I hear from viewers literally all over the world who are finding inspiration and insight and value in what I say within these extemporaneous shows. I trust the divine, that which is truly God, not what the church says is God, but I trust that which is truly God to guide my words and my thoughts, and hopefully I will say the right things that will be helpful to people within these shows as I put myself out there honestly and make myself willing to live my life in a more public fashion perhaps than many people are comfortable doing. That there's something about me living my life in a very open, I suppose you could say, fishbowl sort of way, that people know what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, what my challenges and struggles are, how persistent I'm being, how persevering I'm being about getting through them and finding a solution, sometimes an unconventional solution, and they don't always work out. But doing these shows, it's because this is public access television, there's no money in it. I long for the day when being Sister Who is a financially self-supporting work, but we're not at that point. Consequently, I get to have experiences, is that the best way to put it? I get to have experiences of going to food banks in order to have enough food to survive, and I get to have the experience of living in subsidized housing, so that I get to see firsthand how well these governmental systems of providing housing for poor and disabled people are, or in many cases are not, how effective they are not. The perhaps expected problem with that is that there are so many people in this country who, because they do not experience these things, wrongly interpret that the systems are working better than they are. In in the story The Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, at one point Scrooge is questioned about the poor and needy, and he responds, are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? And later in the one version I have a recording of, the ghost of Christmas Present asks him, have you visited these prisons and these workhouses? And he says, no, I'm taxed for them. Isn't that enough? And of course the ghost of Christmas Present kind of shakes his head in a way that conveys how ridiculous. Because Scrooge hasn't taken the time to see whether his societal systems are working. I sometimes, another one of our comments, I seem to jump between so many different subjects here, but I hope I'm illustrating or bringing out what the common thread is. In a similar sort of way, within our present time, there are a lot of complaints against police, law enforcement personnel who are acting inappropriately and unprofessionally and behaving badly and doing things that are horrid. And the problem with all those horrid incidents is that they make the news, and everyone sees that and has to be reminded that not all police are like that. That's just the one who made the news. There's 1,000 others who are not like that. And so people want to say, well, there are all these good police officers, and this is just the one bad one. But the problem with that is that if you're a good police officer and you overlook bad behavior by one of your colleagues, you no longer have any legitimate right to claim to be a good police officer. The good officers have to speak up when they see their colleagues misbehaving in order to retain honor and respectability for their profession. In a similar sort of way, if Scrooge wanted to talk of his city, his country, his community as being respectable, he loses that legitimate claim to it being respectable if he overlooks the misbehavior of his administrators and other people in his community. When you see something bad happening and you do nothing, in a sense you become an accomplice to it. It needs to be reported, it needs to be challenged, it needs to be stopped. You may not want to take a stand for the particular victim, you may not want to get too involved to where it becomes threatening. Everybody in a verbal abuse situation, for example, everyone can still speak up and say, this is not appropriate conversation. You need to calm down. I understand what you're trying to accomplish and you have a job to do, but you're out of control. Is there anyone else we can call to help you deal with the situation? Somebody, not one somebody though, but all of us somebodies need to stand up and say, this is not appropriate. This is not about me agreeing or disagreeing with your position. This is about me having enough intelligence to recognize that what is happening here in this moment is not a good thing. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to notice or to be able to discern when something bad is happening. And no, we may not all want to be the one to throw ourselves in front of the gun and stop the bullet for the other person and die a hero and a martyr. I don't think it really requires that. It can be as little as just when the perpetrator is about to throw a punch, oops, I stumbled into the garbage can and knocked it over. So there's a big crash. Well, or I dropped a plate and suddenly there's this big crash, and you've got one person about to throw a punch and he suddenly has to look to see what the crash was. And you just stand there going, oops, and as if it was an accident, but it stops the bad thing from happening. It's about everybody doing whatever they can. Going back to our topic of the difference between what's needed and what's wanted. In my experience of food banks, for example, no one talks to the people coming about what they actually need, except in terms of, do you need what I'm giving? I could tell them the 10 different items. Being an autistic person, I do things the same all the time. There's basically 10 items I buy at the grocery store, and that's it. I don't buy anything else. I do the same thing all the time because the familiarity is reassuring. I don't need variety in my diet. I need something that is what it claims to be and keeps me healthy and needs to be available. The problem is that no one is taking a good look at whether the food stamps program is actually providing enough for people to get the food that they need. And if it's not food stamps, then it's food banks. But when I go to food banks, most of the things I find at food banks are the things that nobody else wants. And so they show up and they say, this is an extra I have, I'm giving it to you. And I'm supposed to say, thank you for giving me this thing that you didn't want, that is your extra, that is something you were going to throw away. And I look at it and it's not something I have any use for. It's not something I can cook, it's not something I can eat. It may, if somebody were to hand me a jar of jalapeno peppers, I would have the additional job of finding somebody who could use them, because I can't eat hot, spicy food like that. So I can tell you the 10 things that I need, but if they're never at the food banks, I will not get what I need. But the dynamic I found within the food banks was people who wanted, and I'm not saying the food banks should stop. I guess what I'm hoping is that at some point our food banks will continue to improve. Some of the food banks I went to, they would put together a box of things that people in the kitchen thought were good things, and they would hand it to me and say, here, and expect me to be grateful. And in many cases, 2/3 of what was in the box was stuff I either couldn't eat or couldn't cook or couldn't use. And so then I would have the additional job of either I'd have to throw it away or I'd have to find somebody who could use it, or donate it to some other food bank. But it still leaves me with unmet needs. And that was a common report I heard from a lot of other people I met at food banks also. There are people who don't have significant resources, who don't have enough food, who don't have decent housing, who are living in need and doing the best they can, and they're decent, hardworking people. And there may be a few who are so discouraged by being devalued by the system over and over and over again that trying to find the inspiration to get up every morning and try one more time to make life better takes an enormous amount of effort. And for making the effort to get out of bed and try one more time and see if maybe we can get some good food today, they wind up at a food bank where people look down at them and treat them as less and say, well, you may need a certain, lactose-free milk, for example. We don't have any of that. We've got 2%. Do you want it or not? Well, they can either take what they can't use, or they can say, sorry, this isn't working for me, and leave. And then they still remain a person who's not getting their needs met. And I'm not saying the food bank should stop, and I don't want to discourage volunteers at food banks from being there, because there is a need for survival that is being filled by those sorts of resources. What we need to move toward, however, is treating the recipients as real people and finding out what is they actually need and how can we get that within our food bank, instead of presuming that you are going to need what I am choosing to give, to ask somebody, what do you need? And how can I get what you need, instead of imposing upon you something that you really can't use? It's a disconnect. It's a lack of communication. It's the human family forgetting that ultimately we are a human family. That, as they say in the Peter, Paul, and Mary song, the one that they recorded that says, "Because all men are brothers, all people are brothers and sisters." That there is a greater human family, and we need to take care of each other. Part of taking care of each other is treating them as a real person who is valued, whose opinions and preferences and needs and wants and conditions, that they mesh, that they're recognized and validated. Instead of saying, I'm going to give you all blue jeans, well, what if they don't want blue jeans? Well, I'm going to give you all tennis shoes. Well, what if they need work shoes, not tennis shoes? You have to talk to the person and find out who they are and what they need and what their aspirations are and how they want to grow and how they want to heal from all the abuses that have been heaped on them. And there are a lot of wonderful people I've met as volunteers at food banks, and I sympathize with them in a way because they really don't know what to do. The few times when I've been there and I've mentioned that things in experience we had in common, or if I had the audacity to mention, oh, by the way, I have a master's degree in theological studies from a particular school, and there was one time where I met someone who had also attended that particular school, and it was a very awkward situation because going through a master's program, everyone I met there wanted to assume that they would never be the one in need, that they would never be the one receiving food at a food bank or living in subsidized housing or trying to speak about justice issues when they were the one who was in need of justice. Within my current housing situation, I continued to find hierarchical things going on where the management has decided what they're going to give, and I have to keep saying, but that's not what I need, and this doesn't work for me. And the conflicts that have erupted from that are just so in defiance of common sense. And I can't believe that I'm the only one who experiences that. And so I guess this episode kind of comes down to imploring viewers and the rest of the world around me to take notice of the poor and include them, and to take notice of your governmental systems, and instead of ignoring them like Ebenezer Scrooge did, to talk to your elected persons, your city council persons, your state representatives, your federal representatives, and find out whether the systems are working the way they're supposed to. Because it's not just about having a system, and I understand there's no perfect system, but it's not just about having a system, it's about having a system and continually improving it, and finding out what works and what doesn't, and why. And every system, there is a context for the time of its creation. Certain things that happened because of the circumstances that existed at the time of creation. Well, 10 or 20 or 30 years later, the circumstances have changed. And the goal may be the same, that everybody needs food, clothing, shelter, and in our current time, probably communication and transportation as well. We're expanding the basic needs of life by making our societies more complex. But the systems that worked 50 years ago may not work as well now. And if they don't work as well now, then it becomes a challenge to all of us to look at the system, to be aware that its efficiency is falling, and to figure out how to bring it back up to a level of efficiency that really meets the need. I went to one food bank, for example, and half of what I got there was Hostess Twinkies. And no offense to Hostess intended, I'm sure a lot of people enjoy those. It's not healthy food. It's a treat that you have once in a while. It's a dessert. It's not supposed to be the main staple of your diet. But half of what was in my grocery bag when I left there was Twinkies. And I really didn't know whether to eat them or give them away or what to do with them. It was just a bag of stuff they shoved at me, and when I got out to the car, I was like, okay, this is not a healthy diet. You can't live on dessert all the time. You have to have something nutritious. In that instance, the consequences reflected that the volunteers or the organization that provided the resources to the volunteers, I mean, it wasn't the volunteers who went and got the Twinkies. They showed up to volunteer and help with the distribution. The organization handed them resources and said, distribute these. And I guess if I had been one of the volunteers, I would have looked at them and said, you want us to distribute these? Well, where's the good stuff? everyone's always talking about fresh fruits and vegetables, but I've kind of gotten real leery of getting fresh fruits and vegetables from food banks, because 99% of the time I will spend 2 or 3 hours cutting out all the bad spots, the bruises, and trimming off the mold, and horrible things that would not be tolerated in any grocery store anywhere. So why, because I'm poor, do I have to deal with produce and food that could not be sold in any store because of its condition? And is it better than nothing? Well, maybe. I'm not sure, because when you are asking a whole segment of the population to live on substandard food, they're probably going to be dealing with lots of health issues that the rest of people don't face as well. What it all comes back to, however, is this basic point of remembering that a person is a person is a person is a person. And another one of my favorites, there but for the grace of God go I. If it wasn't for being lucky in life, if it wasn't for the right person at the right time, or someone recognizing my contribution and giving me a chance, if it wasn't for being the one that they picked instead of the one that they said, sorry, the job's been filled, go away. A lot of my current situation is because they picked somebody else. I'm autistic. I can do incredible things, but I'm quirky because autism makes my brain work in a slightly different way. It's really not that difficult to accommodate autism at all if you're willing to do so. A lot of companies, it seems, don't want to make the effort, but those who have are very impressed with the unanticipated rewards that have followed. If we go back to a person is a person is a person, however, each person you meet has something beautiful and valuable to contribute. And the more you know that person, the more you know exactly where we can use that person and exactly what they should be doing and how they can be the most helpful to everyone around them. If you don't know them, you can't answer any of those questions. You don't know what's best for them. You don't know what they can contribute. They're just a big question mark. And in rediscovering each other and in remembering to love each other, we begin to take the human resource of each other and make all of humanity a more empowered phenomena, a more empowered place, a more empowered experience. I was trying to share some of these ideas with someone a couple days ago, and it was a difficult conversation because no matter what I said, this person kept responding that, well, we can't fix the government because it's too entrenched, and we can't do this because there's not enough money, and we can't do that because we can't get all the people to work together. And there are some societal problems that require an unusual amount of solidarity if we're ever going to fix them. And, after 5 minutes of this, I finally said, well, how do you come to terms with all this? Because I knew that this person was not going to accept any of the suggestions that I was offering. It's almost as if they were more committed to enabling the problem. The law enforcement person who says, well, I can't report everyone because then everyone will gang up on me and I won't get the promotion and I'll get all the worst assignments, because it's what an acquaintance referred to as the blue code, that nobody tattletales on anybody else. Well, if nobody holds anyone accountable, the worst behavior will be the only behavior that happens. There needs to be some internal pressure to say, you do what is right, because if you don't, it reflects badly on all of us. And I am not going to be silent while you do what is wrong, because I don't want it reflecting badly on me, and I don't want it reflecting badly on any of our colleagues, because we are all in this together. Whether it is law enforcement, whether it's the Postal Service, whether it is customer service agents in a retail store, whether it's someone at the grocery store. We're all in this together, and it's only by working together and doing our best and talking to each other to figure out what the need is that we stop imposing our generosity. I don't know if it really is generosity if we're giving what somebody doesn't need, if we're making their life more difficult by giving them more problems to deal with, more challenges to deal with. A well-trained dog is a blessing of immeasurable value. I use an autism service dog in many places I go, and it makes such a massive difference. And all my friends have confirmed that, yeah, you are completely different when he's with you. And granting that, to just immediately then say, well, then everybody should have a dog. Well, not necessarily, because there are some people who don't have the time to train a dog. And an untrained dog could be a problem that sabotages every other good thing that's happening in life. When somebody gives something that is not what's needed and may be something that requires more time and energy to deal with, it actually makes life worse, not better. And that's not what any volunteer I've ever met at a food bank wanted to happen. But the only way we're going to fix that is by working together and putting the accountability further and further up the line. That if a grocery store is going to donate food, to start saying, we will only accept food that is every bit as good as what you put on your shelves. And if there's not going to be any food, then we need to find another way to supply food, because we can't be giving our most vulnerable members of society the scraps and the crumbs and the worst examples that nobody else wants, because that will ultimately begin to convey to them that we don't value them, and we must, because each and every one of those people has something that we need. But if we don't love them enough to find out what it is and include them in our lives and include them in our communal lives, their time on earth will come to an end and they will be gone, and we will all be impoverished thereby. And it doesn't have to be that way. We've got the intelligence, we've got everything we need to make much, much better things happen.